You will address the king with respect, or you will not address him at all. Ara flinched, her hands stilling over the silver platter she'd been polishing. The head servant, Margot, stood in the doorway, arms crossed, expression carved from disgust. And you will certainly not be anywhere near the ceremonial hall tonight. Your presence would be an insult. Ara nodded, keeping her eyes downcast as she'd learned over the years. Speaking only invited cruelty, more reminders of what she was. Nothing. An Omega without a wolf, without family, without value. She'd been found as an infant on the Blood Moon territory borders, wrapped in rags with no identification. The Alpha at the time had allowed her to live, a decision many still questioned. She'd grown up in the palace shadows, doing work no one else wanted, eating scraps no one else would touch, occupying a space so small most pack members didn't know her name. Tonight was the Ceremonia Lua de Sangre, an event occurring once every 50 years when the moon turned blood red and the veil between spirit and living realms grew thin. The Alpha King would present his chosen mate to the ancestors and assembled leaders. For months, the palace had prepared. Era had scrubbed floors until her knees bled, polished silver until her reflection mocked her, prepared feast dishes she'd never taste. All in silence, because silence was survival. "Lady Seraphina arrives within the hour," Margot continued sharply. "Stay in the lower kitchens. You will not be seen. Understood?" Ara nodded. Margot swept from the room with practiced self-importance. Lady Seraphina, daughter of Alpha Councilman Various, beautiful, educated, powerful, with a wolf white as winter snow and twice as cold. Everything an Alpha King's mate should be. Everything Ara would never be. The beast, the first sign something was wrong, came as screaming. Not excited chatter, but genuine terror echoing through stone corridors, making every wolf freeze. Era looked up, from the potatoes she'd been peeling, heart racing. The screaming was followed by a sound she'd only heard once before. A roar. Deep, primal, ancient. The kind that vibrated in your chest and made your bones feel like water. Fenrir, the Alpha King's war beast. Everyone knew about Fenrir. The creature was legend made flesh. A beast from old times when magic ran thick in blood and monsters walked alongside men. Bonded to the Blood Moon royal line for over 1,000 years, Fenrir was said to be unkillable, unstoppable, and utterly loyal to one thing: the true ruler. Not the person who wore the crown, but the person who deserved it. Ara had never seen Fenrir. Few had. The creature was kept in the ancient forest bordering palace grounds, emerging only for war or ceremonies of highest importance. Another roar shook the palace. Stone cracked. She should stay where she was. But something pulled at her. Invisible threads wrapped around her ribs, tugging her toward the upper levels. Before logic could override instinct, Era found herself moving. She slipped from the kitchens into corridors where servants ran in every direction, pack members shouting contradicting orders, fear saturating the air so thickly she could taste it. She pressed against the wall, making herself small as people rushed past without seeing her, invisible as always. Ara climbed the servant stairs and emerged where the grand hall was located. The massive doors stood open, and through them she could see pack members crowding the entrance, faces pale, eyes wide with shock. She shouldn't look. Should turn around. But that pull dragged her forward. Era edged closer, slipping between bodies that didn't register her presence, until she could see into the hall itself. What she saw made her breath catch. The hall was filled with hundreds in ceremonial attire, all frozen in stillness. At the far end, on the raised dais where the throne sat carved from obsidian, stood King Killian Stormborn himself. Tall, powerfully built, dark hair to his shoulders, eyes like molten gold. He wore black ceremonial armor etched with silver runes, and his presence commanded absolute attention. Beside him stood Lady Seraphina in white silk, looking like a goddess, looking like a queen. But neither was what had captured every person's attention. Between the throne and the crowd stood Fenrir. The creature was massive, twice the size of the largest wolf Ara had ever seen. Fur black as a starless night, eyes glowing eerie blue. Its shoulders were broader than a man was tall, claws carving grooves into stone with each step. This wasn't a wolf. This was something older, something that existed before wolves learned to walk as men. The war beast stood in the hall's center, massive head turning slowly as if searching for someone. King Killian spoke, his voice carrying easily. Fenrir recognizes the blood of the ancients. He calls to the one who carries the mark of the first line. Step forward. Step forward now. No one moved. The crowd remained frozen as Fenrir's glowing gaze continued sweeping the room. Era felt her heart hammering, felt sweat beating despite the cool air, felt that inexplicable pull growing stronger, more insistent, more impossible to ignore. This had nothing to do with her. She was nobody. She didn't even have a wolf. But her feet moved anyway. One step, then another, carrying her forward even as her mind screamed to stop. The crowd parted without conscious thought, people shifting aside as if compelled, creating a path from the entrance directly to Fenrir. Ara walked as if in a dream, vision tunneling until all she could see was those glowing blue eyes fixed on her with intensity that felt strangely familiar. She was aware of whispers starting, gasps of shock, hissed questions. Who is that? Is that the kitchen girl? Someone stop her before she gets killed. But no one stopped her. They simply watched as the girl they'd ignored for 20 years walked, toward a creature that could tear her apart with a single swipe. When she was perhaps 10 feet away, Fenrir moved. 3 ground-shaking steps forward, closing the distance in seconds. Ara's breath caught. This close, she could see every detail. Scars crisscrossing Fenrir's muzzle from countless battles, intelligence in those glowing eyes, the way air around the creature shimmered with barely contained power. She should run. Every instinct screamed to flee. But she could only stand there as Fenrir lowered its massive head, bringing those glowing eyes level with hers. For a moment, nothing happened. The entire hall held its breath. Then Fenrir did something that hadn't occurred in living memory, something that hadn't happened since the very first Alpha King proved his right to rule over 1,000 years ago. The war beast bent its front legs and lowered its body until its massive head rested on the stone floor at Ara's feet. Complete and utter submission. The silence was deafening. Ara stared down at the creature kneeling before her, mind refusing to process what was happening. This was impossible. She was nobody. Nothing. Just the kitchen girl. But Fenrir didn't seem to care. The beast remained motionless, waiting. Ara's hands trembled as she slowly, hesitantly reached down. Her fingers made contact with Fenrir's fur. The world exploded. Power slammed into her like a physical force, driving her to her knees beside the war beast. Images flooded her mind, memories that weren't hers, knowledge sleeping in her blood for 20 years, suddenly awakening with violent force. Battles fought before recorded history, wolves the size of mountains running beneath skies painted with colors that no longer existed, a lineage stretching back through time, an unbroken chain of power and magic connecting her to something ancient, something primordial. The first wolves, the original rulers who commanded not through strength alone, but through connection to the very essence of being wolf, being wild, being free. Their line had been thought extinct, wiped out in wars that reshaped the world. But it hadn't been extinct. It had been hidden, protected, waiting for her. Ara gasped as visions released her, leaving her kneeling beside Fenrir, with tears streaming down her face and power crackling along her skin like lightning. She looked up and found King Killian standing directly in front of her. He'd moved from the dais without her noticing, and now stared down with an expression she couldn't read. "Impossible," someone whispered, Lady Seraphina's voice, sharp with disbelief and fury. "She's nobody. She doesn't even have a wolf. This must be some trick." But Killian didn't look away from Era. His golden eyes searched her face as if seeing her for the first time. "Fenrir doesn't make mistakes," he said quietly, voice carrying to every corner. "The war beast knows old blood when he encounters it. He recognizes the mark of the first line." He extended his hand. "Rise. Tell me your name." "Ara." The word came out barely louder than a whisper. She forced herself to speak again. "My name is Ara." She didn't take his hand. Couldn't. The power crackling through her veins made her afraid to touch anyone. Killian seemed to understand. He lowered his hand but didn't step back. Instead, he turned to address the crowd. "The ceremony will proceed, but not as planned. Fenrir has chosen. The old magic has spoken. This woman carries the blood of the primordials, and by laws older than the crown I wear, she is recognized as true royalty." The hall erupted in chaos, voices shouting over each other in protest, shock, excitement at witnessing something that would be spoken of for generations. Through it all, Lady Seraphina remained silent, but Ara could feel the weight of her stare, the hatred radiating from the woman who'd expected to become queen. Ara wanted to run, to disappear back into shadows where she belonged. But Fenrir remained beside her, the massive beast pressing against her side as if to anchor her in place. Running was no longer an option. The awakening King Killian raised his hand, and the hall fell silent. The power of an Alpha King's command settling over them like physical weight. There will be time for questions later. For now, we honor the Blood Moon's choice. Ara of the primordial line, you will stand with me for the remainder of this ceremony. Fenrir has named you, and I will not dishonor the old magic by refusing his judgment." He turned back to Ara. This time, he didn't offer his hand. He simply waited, giving her the choice to follow or flee. Ara looked at Fenrir, at the ancient creature who'd recognized something in her she hadn't known existed. Then at the crowd staring with expressions ranging from awe to outrage. Her entire life she'd been invisible, insignificant, ignored. Now every eye was on her. But she was tired, so unbearably tired of being nothing, of accepting scraps, of believing she deserved cruelty simply because she'd been born without a wolf. Except she did have a wolf. She could feel it now, that presence inside her that had been sleeping for 20 years, stirring at last. It wasn't like the wolves she'd seen others shift into. This was older, wilder. Something that carried the echo of when their kind had been gods instead of subjects. And it was hers. Ara took a breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked forward to stand beside the Alpha King. The crowd gasped. Fenrir followed, positioning himself on her other side. Together, the three of them stood before the assembled packs, as witnesses to something that shouldn't have been possible. The blood rite. The ceremony continued, though nothing proceeded as planned. The High Elder, an ancient wolf whose fur had gone pure white, stepped forward to perform the blood rites. But as the Elder prepared the ceremonial blade, Killian spoke. "The rites must be altered. Ara carries primordial blood. The ancestors will not require proof of her worthiness. They will require acknowledgement of her supremacy." The words sent shockwaves through the crowd. "My king," the old wolf said carefully, "the ceremony has been performed the same way for centuries. To alter it now might be seen as what?" Lady Seraphina's voice cut across the hall like a blade dipped in honey. She'd moved from beside the throne, white dress flowing around her, might be seen as the king being manipulated by a convenient trick. We all know primordial bloodlines died out centuries ago. What we're witnessing is either impossibility or clever deception. Each word felt like a physical blow. Part of Ara agreed this had to be a mistake. But the power thrumming through her veins, the way Fenrir pressed protectively against her, the memories echoing in her mind, all insisted this was real. Killian turned to face Seraphina, and the temperature seemed to drop. Are you questioning Fenrir's judgment? Because if so, I'd be happy to arrange a demonstration of just how infallible the war beast's instincts truly are. The threat was unmistakable. Seraphina's composure cracked slightly before she smoothed it away. Of course not, Your Majesty. I merely suggest caution. This girl has lived among us 20 years, and never shown any sign of ancient blood. Never even manifested a wolf. The High Elder cleared his throat. Perhaps we might allow the blood itself to provide answers. The ceremonial blade has been blessed by every Alpha King since our founding. If Ara truly carries primordial blood, it will react to the old magic in ways normal wolf blood cannot. Killian looked at Ara, question in his eyes. He was giving her the choice. She could refuse. Walk away and return to the kitchens, to safety of being invisible, or step forward and prove whether the impossible was truth. Era thought about 20 years of scrubbing floors and eating scraps and being treated as less than nothing, about every cruel word, every dismissive glance, every moment she'd been made to feel worthless. And she thought about the power now flowing through her veins. Do it, she said, voice steadier than she felt. Test the blood. The High Elder approached with the ceremonial blade, beautiful in a deadly way, forged from sacred silver and etched with runes so old their meaning had been lost. He took her hand gently. This will hurt. The old magic is not gentle when it wakes. Ara nodded, bracing herself. The Elder drew the blade across her palm in one swift motion. Pain flared bright and sharp, but she didn't pull away. Blood welled from the cut, crimson and ordinary. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then her blood touched the runes, and everything changed. The silver began to glow, faintly, then with increasing brilliance until it was nearly impossible to look at directly. The runes ignited with golden light, ancient words blazing to life after centuries of dormancy. Ara gasped as power surged up her, arm racing through her veins like liquid fire. It didn't hurt exactly, but it was overwhelming, consuming, transformative. She could feel something inside responding to the magic. Barriers she hadn't known existed beginning to crumble. And then she felt her wolf. Not the whisper of presence from before, but the full, overwhelming reality of it. The creature that had been sleeping inside her for 20 years suddenly opened its eyes, and Ara nearly collapsed under the weight of its consciousness joining with hers. It was massive, ancient, powerful beyond anything imaginable. Its fur was moonlight on water, silver and white and pale blue woven together. Its eyes glowed with ethereal light now pouring from the ceremonial blade. This wasn't a normal wolf. This was a primordial. The light intensified until it filled the entire hall, forcing pack members to shield their eyes. When it finally faded, Ara stood transformed. Her plain servant's dress had been replaced by ceremonial armor that materialized from magic itself, silver and white metal etched with ancient runes, fitting her perfectly. Her brown hair now fell in waves that caught and held light. Her eyes, when she opened them, glowed with the same pale blue luminescence as her wolf. The silence was absolute. The High Elder stared with tears streaming down his weathered face. "Blessed by the moon," he whispered. "After 1,000 years, the primordial line has returned." He dropped to both knees, pressing his forehead to stone. "Forgive us, first daughter. Forgive us for not seeing what you were." His words broke the spell, and like a wave, pack members began to kneel. First one, then 10, then hundreds, until the entire hall was filled with wolves, bowing before a girl who that morning had been nobody worth noticing. Killian remained standing, as was his right, but even he looked at her differently now. The calculation in his golden eyes replaced by recognition, respect, and something dangerously close to fascination. He moved closer until he stood directly in front of her. Era of the primordial line, Fenrir has chosen you. The old magic has acknowledged you. And I, Killian Stormborn, Alpha King of the Blood Moon Pack, recognize your right to stand as equal to any ruler in this realm. He extended his hand once more. Ara understood what he was offering. Not just assistance, but partnership. Alliance. A place beside him, not as subordinate, but as someone whose bloodline was potentially even more ancient and powerful than his own. She reached out and placed her hand in his. The moment their skin made contact, power arced between them, visible to everyone as silver and gold light intertwined and spiraled upward. Era gasped at the intensity, at the sense of connection that suddenly existed between her and this king. She could feel his wolf, powerful, dominant, absolutely alpha. And she could feel how her primordial wolf responded. Not with submission, but with challenge, interest, and recognition that went deeper than logic. Mate. The word echoed through her consciousness. She knew with absolute certainty what Fenrir had recognized wasn't just her bloodline. It was this connection, this bond that shouldn't exist between a kitchen servant and a king. Killian's eyes widened slightly. He felt it too. This changes everything, he said quietly, so only she could hear. He turned to address the crowd. The Ceremonia Lua de Sangre will conclude as the old magic demands. Ara of the primordial line will stand beside me not as consort, but as equal ruler, as ancient laws decree when one bearing the first blood is discovered. Equal ruler, not queen subordinate to the king, but actual shared sovereignty. It was unprecedented, radical, and according to laws so old most had forgotten they existed, completely legitimate. Lady Seraphina made a sound that might have been a laugh or sob, then turned and walked from the hall, white dress trailing like the ghost of futures that would never be. The threat. What followed was ancient and complex. Oaths spoken in languages Ara didn't consciously know but somehow understood. Her blood mixed with Killian's and offered to ancestors, Fenrir standing guard as witness and protector. When the ceremony finally concluded, first light of dawn broke through high windows. Killian turned to her, allowing his formal mask to slip slightly. You must be exhausted. We should get you somewhere you can rest. Before Ara could respond, the hall doors slammed open with enough force to crack stone. A messenger stumbled in, clothes torn, face streaked with blood, eyes wild with panic. Alpha King, he gasped, barely able to stand. The eastern border, we're under attack. An army thousands strong, led by wolves we've never seen. They carry banners marked with symbols from the old wars. He looked directly at Ara, and his next words made her blood run cold. They're asking for the primordial. They're demanding she be turned over to them, or they'll destroy everything. The hall erupted in chaos, but this time the fear was immediate and real. Killian's expression hardened instantly. He looked at Ara, and in his eyes she saw both protection and a question. She was his equal now. Whatever decision they made, they'd make together. They want me, Era said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. If I go to them, will they leave the pack alone? No, Killian's response was immediate and absolute. You're under my protection now. Under Fenrir's protection. I don't surrender what's mine, and you're not going anywhere near whatever force is at our borders. His possessiveness settled something inside her that had been vibrating with fear. She wasn't alone in this. Then we go to them together, Ara said, watching Killian's expression shift to something like pride. We find out who they are and what they want, and we show them the primordial line doesn't bow to threats. Fenrir released a roar that shook the palace. Foundations. The ancient war beast's eyes glowed brighter, and Ara felt her own wolf respond, felt power rising inside her that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Killian smiled, the smile of a king who'd just realized he'd gained not just a mate, but an ally strong enough to stand beside him in battles to come. Then we ride at dawn, prepare for war. The crowd began to move, wolves rushing to gather weapons, messengers alerting warriors, the organized chaos of an army mobilizing. Through it all, Ara stood beside the Alpha King, with Fenrir at her side, and magic crackling along her skin. For the first time in 20 years, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, powerful, like she might actually deserve the destiny that had just changed everything. Epilogue. The battle lasted 3 days. The army at the eastern border turned out to be remnants of old families, wolves who'd served the primordial line before it fell, who'd been waiting centuries for a true heir. They hadn't come to destroy, but to kneel, to offer service, to pledge loyalty to the bloodline they'd never stopped believing would return. But their arrival triggered responses from other factions. Packs who feared what a resurgent primordial line meant. Political rivals who saw opportunity in chaos. Ancient enemies who remembered when first wolves had ruled with absolute authority. Ara fought beside Killian, her primordial wolf emerging for the first time and proving every bit as powerful as legend suggested. She moved through the battlefield like moonlight made flesh, silver fur glowing even in daylight, power washing over enemies and allies alike. Fenrir fought with her, obeying her commands as readily as Killian's. Together, they became a force that couldn't be stopped. When dust finally settled, when treaties had been signed and alliances forged, Ara stood once more in the grand hall beside Killian. This time with no ceremony, no crowd. Just the two of them and dawn light streaming through hastily repaired windows. You saved us, Killian said quietly. Your power turned the tide. Without you, we would have been overwhelmed. Era shook her head. We saved each other. That's what mates do, isn't it? The word hung between them, finally acknowledged. Killian reached out to cup her face, touch gentle despite calluses from wielding weapons. I didn't choose you. Fenrir did. Fate did. But given the chance to choose again, knowing everything I know now, I'd choose you every single time. Tears pricked Ara's eyes. I spent 20 years being invisible, being nothing. Now I'm everything I never knew I could be. It's terrifying. I know, Killian said with understanding that made her believe he truly did. But you don't have to carry it alone. That's what this bond means. We face it together. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. But she didn't want to pull away. She wanted this. Wanted him. Wanted the life that had been offered to her. When their lips met, the kiss was soft and careful. A promise rather than a demand. When they pulled apart, Ara saw her own wonder reflected in his golden eyes. Together, she agreed, feeling her primordial wolf settle contentedly inside her consciousness, finally at peace with where it belonged. 6 months later, Ara stood once more in the grand hall, wearing a crown forged specifically for her. Silver from sacred mountains, set with moonstones that glowed with their own light. As the High Elder placed the crown on her head and declared her queen in truth, Ara looked out at faces watching her and marveled at how much had changed. Killian stood beside her, his own crown gleaming. When the ceremony concluded and the pack erupted in celebration, he led her to the balcony overlooking the entire territory. Do you regret it? Killian asked softly. The life you lost? The simplicity? Era considered the question seriously, thinking about the girl she'd been 6 months ago. Invisible, ignored, certain she'd never be anything more. Then she thought about the woman she was now, powerful, seen, standing beside a king who looked at her as if she were the moon itself. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. That girl needed to die so this woman could live." Killian smiled and pulled her close. "Then we build something new. Something that honors both old ways and new. Something worthy of a primordial queen and the Alpha King lucky enough to be chosen by her." Ara laughed, the sound bright and genuine, so different from the quiet, frightened silence she'd maintained for 20 years. "Chosen by Fenrir, you mean?" "Chosen by fate," Killian corrected. "The war beast just had the good sense to recognize it first." As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Era leaned into Killian's embrace and allowed herself to simply exist in the moment. No longer invisible, no longer worthless, no longer the girl who scrubbed floors and survived by being nothing. She was Ara of the primordial line, queen of the blood, Moonpack, mate to the Alpha King, and for the first time in her entire life, she was exactly where she was meant to be.